Who We Be was a series of mine on YouTube introducing all 18 teams from Mexico's top flight Liga MX. If you've seen my YouTube shorts, my Instagram, my TikTok, you may have caught wind of this series where I give you a rundown of all the different clubs, what they represent, how they stand in the modern game, and just some cool facts about the teams. So first off, as a heads up, if you haven't watched the series yet, make sure you go and do that and then come back to this video. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the clubs and Mexican football as a whole. So the first thing that I learned and was kind of surprised about within Mexican football is how regularly these teams change locations. Now, if you're like me from Europe, you'll know that most football clubs, it's very rare for a football club to change city, change location. And when in the rare occasion that it does happen, it causes mass outrage. For example, in the UK, when you look at Wimbledon and now what is MK Dons, you look at the rivalry there and the pure hatred that people from the UK have for MK Dons. It's clear that whenever a team moves city like that, that is something that will be absolutely hated for fans of the clubs, but also for fans just around the country. But in Mexico, this is much more common. You have teams like Necaxa, who moved from the capital, Mexico City, up north. Then you have Cruz Azul, one of the biggest teams in the country, Cruz Azul, who moved into the city after being in Hidalgo. And then you have teams that are newly formed, like Mazatlan, who were formerly in a city called Morelia, miles and miles away from where they are right now in Sinaloa. And it seems to be something very American in my mind. You have teams from the NFL, from basketball, from baseball, that they'll happily move from one city to another. And from what I can see, there's not that much unrest. I guess sometimes you'll see that. But if you had that in Europe and especially in the UK, you have teams like Liverpool, Leeds, Newcastle that are so important to the culture, to the history of those particular cities, that if they decided one day to just pick up and move to another place, the absolute turmoil that that would cause, not just for their own fans, but for fans around the country. I can't imagine it. I still can't wrap my head around it. But in Mexico in particular, it seems to be such a common thing for teams to move from one place to another without that much kind of social unrest from people from those local places. And another thing that blew my mind within Mexican football is that you have all these famous teams like Club America, Chivas, Monterrey, Pumas, Cruz Azul, but actually the oldest team in Mexico is Pachuca. Okay, Pachuca are a relatively successful team, but for people outside of Mexico who don't follow Mexican football as regularly, it will catch you by surprise to learn that the oldest team in the country and founded in 1901 was actually Pachuca. And then you do have these incredibly successful and famous teams like Chivas and Club America, who are still about 100 years old. But within Mexican football and the Liga MX in particular, it's interesting because you have such a mix of teams that are, 90, 100 years old. And then on the other side, something that I found particularly interesting is that you have teams like San Luis, Mazatlan, and also Juarez, teams that have been around for less than 20 years, who are trying to fight and battle with some of those more successful and historic teams. And it creates such an interesting sort of disparity between teams with a lot of history that are looking to sort of maintain their control over Mexican football, and then some of these newer teams that are trying to make their way in and starting to create this conversation between the old and the new teams. And also, whilst talking about the foundations and the creation of a lot of these teams, especially in the early days, something that I found particularly interesting is that these teams were often created and influenced by people from across the pond in Europe. For instance, Pachuca's history is tied to British factory workers, whilst in Toluca, they were founded by German brothers. And then you have one of the most interesting stories, in my opinion, which was the creation of Atlas in Guadalajara. The club was created by local youth who went on a trip to the UK to go to a school and study there, but in their time they learned and enjoyed playing football so much that they wanted to bring it back to their local city in Mexico. So the international influence on Mexican football is highly significant when you have people from the UK, Germany and Spain helping create some of these teams that we all know and love today. But with the newer clubs like Mazatlan and Juarez, it's actually businessmen and women from Mexico that are helping to drive these teams, rallying support from locals. These teams didn't have much of a football story before the start of the 2000s, but especially with Tijuana winning the Apertura in 2012, it was a true David and Goliath story as they went on to beat a team with so much history in Toluca. I also want to take a second to say a massive thank you to everyone that's watched the videos, that's shown support and given their feedback and their kind of views on all of the different teams. And I also want to give a special shout out to the fans of Santos Laguna who showed the most love on their particular video of any other club that I made a video about. I definitely didn't expect it. And before I started this series, I was expecting maybe more love from the likes of Club America and Chivas fans, but it was actually Santos Laguna. Obviously, if you are a fan of some of these other clubs, it's not too late to go back to those videos and show some love. But for Santos Laguna, I definitely have to come out to your stadium and I have to come and watch a game. So what did you think about this series? Maybe you found a new team along the way. So until next time, guys, peace out.